in customer feedback management in 2022 and will run for about 1 hour. During this time, we'll share some trends and information on tools and technologies for customer feedback management, which we hope you'll find insightful. We'll have some presentations, a panel discussion, and of course, audience question time. So think of your questions as we go along and feel free to enter them in the chat room at any point so you don't forget them. Importantly, we're giving away a bottle of champagne to the best audience question as judged by our esteemed sponsor. I'm Sharon Melamed, Managing Director of Matchboard, and I'll shortly introduce the first speaker. Just some quick housekeeping first. We're recording this event, and if you have internet issues at any point, there is a phone number and passcode you can dial in, and that's in your calendar invitation. Finally, could I ask you to stay on mute until question time to prevent outside noise? So now I have the pleasure of introducing Max Lipovetsky, who is CEO of Centra CX, one of our sponsors today. Max, who's driven product innovation in the customer experience space for over 20 years, is going to share some interesting data about the state of play in Australia in customer feedback management. So over to you, Max.
Thanks, Sharon. Now, hopefully that you can see the slides there. Okay, so look, I'd like to share with you some of the VoC learnings and best practices we've uncovered in our work with some of Australia's best brands. And Centra CX is in a privileged position to gather these insights because Centra CX is a VoC platform or a survey platform. It helps organisations to collect customer feedback at every touch point along the customer journey, connect that feedback with their front line so that they can understand the full picture, and create action within the organisation by getting customer feedback and the rich insights to the people who can do something about it. So before we consider what the data tells us about best practices, some context would be useful. Best practices need to align with your intent. We generally see 4 main reasons that drive organisations to put in place VoC programs. Process and product improvement is something that's important to everyone across the organisation. And that's where you identify key customer pain points, understand the impact and quantify those, create initiatives to address them, and then track the effectiveness of those initiatives, making sure that they lift customer sentiment. Business reporting is something that's really important to the management side of things, which is really about tracking the health of the customer base. It's often the biggest asset of many organisations. So looking at the trends and the directions that's going in. Retention, complaints and compliance is typically an operational concern. And that's really about giving every single customer an opportunity to have their complaint heard and addressed before they run off to regulators, ombudsman or social media. So individual customer complaints and closing the loop on those. And then employee engagement, which is a lot more than just using customer feedback as a way of coaching your frontline employees. It also creates an opportunity for customer feedback to be used as a way of driving change within the organisation, and with it, employee empowerment, if you like, and meaning in the work that they do. We also see marketing get involved with customer feedback, and that's typically in the context of looking for insights, whether it's brand insights or product insights. And it's done enriched with customer feedback, but typically in the context of additional specific tools like focus groups or detailed studies. And recently, the digital teams have been very engaged with customer feedback as well as an input into their view of usability and the way that they collect customer sentiment, together with specific information about customer clicks, pages and drop-off points. So really those are the main reasons we see feedback put in. And when considering what best practice should be, you've got to think about which are the purposes you're actually trying to achieve. Best practice in each situation is very much tied to the real intent behind your program. So there are 2 key things which stand out across all these purposes that I'd really like to touch on that we've learnt about, and they're data quality and data quantity. And
sorry,
of course,
Max, sorry, you've gone one slide too far.
Sorry.
You might just
Apologies. Thank you.
That's all right.
Two key things that stand out across all these purposes, and I'd really like to touch on what we've learned about these items: data quality and data quantity. Of course, they're significantly driven by the channel on which you interact with your customers on which you gather feedback. So let's have a look at some of the key things that we've learned. And I'll just comment on the data briefly. As a platform, we use very high level anonymized and aggregated data to improve overall platform performance and the capabilities that we develop for our customers. This data provides insights that I'd like to share with you, but it's important to appreciate that it's drawn from millions of survey responses across a wide range of industries and customer segments. This can give you a great indication of what's going to be achieved generally, but each business and use case may be quite different. So with that in mind, let's have a look. Participation rate. Participation rate is obviously critical to data quantity. We define participation rate as a number of surveys where at least one question was answered, divided by the total number of survey offers made to customers. It's important to recognise that with outbound offers, such as email and SMS, this is quite easy to calculate. With inbound channels, such as voice, where IVR surveys are presented to the customer after the agent has disconnected, but while the customer is still on call, this calculation can be a little more nuanced. Nonetheless, the results are quite definitive, with voice providing 4 times the participation rate of the email channel on average. The key observation with this is that if your workflow has customers calling in, then voice is a much more effective way of gaining feedback than contacting the customer sometime after the call with an email or even with an SMS. We found that the duration from the interaction to when the customer receives the survey offer is very significant in driving the participation rate. And we speculate that the immediate proximity and customer ease of voice surveys is what drives the high rates on that channel. In any case, if your workflow does not involve an inbound voice interaction or your technology will not support it, we see significantly better results for SMS than for email and suggest it's worth giving it a go if you're not doing it. There is some anecdotal evidence to suggest that the recent surge in spam SMS may have an impact on this, but we've not seen anything statistically significant in the data yet that would suggest that. Looking at survey completion, this is how many of the respondents completed all mandatory questions in the survey, divided by the number that answered at least one question. Again, there is a very clear indicator that email respondents are 33% more likely to complete all questions. This is particularly relevant if your survey has a larger number of questions. To maintain good completion rates, our general recommendation is to minimise the length of your surveys. And for voice and SMS surveys, have no more than 3 main questions and a maximum of 2 conditional questions. We also strongly recommend against making any verbatim questions mandatory, as this has a pretty significant impact on your completion rates. We now come to one of the most interesting areas, and that's the question of whether there is a non-responder bias as a result of the feedback channel. Data shows that the answer is quite clear. If we look at these survey responses where customers gave the most negative sentiment, say an NPS 0 or a 1 on a 1 to 5 scale, we see that there is 3 times more likely to occur on an email survey rather than a voice one. Anecdotally, we believe this has got to do with the customer effort to complete the survey, and that those with positive and neutral opinions are less likely to go through the additional effort and the delayed response that is associated with email. Looking at the same data from a positive sentiment perspective, voice responses are 18% more likely to provide the most positive score, so that's like an NPS 10. This is a significant difference, as only 1/3 of that delta is explained by the most negative response. And this trend of greater negativity goes all the way through the scale. Turning our eye towards data quality, let's consider how likely respondents are to leave a verbatim response. By verbatim here, we mean open text in a digital form, such as email or SMS, and recorded audio on voice surveys. As you can see, customers are almost twice as likely to leave verbatim information, indicating the reason for their scores on the voice channel. The SMS channel sits squarely between the two. Assuming that the length of the verbatim is a measure of its quality, it's interesting to see how channel affects this. The average number of words on an SMS verbatim is only 7. That's just one typical length sentence. That would seem consistent with a situation where customers are providing a verbatim using the keyboard on a phone or tablet. For email survey offers, the average length is 26 words, which is the equivalent of a short paragraph, which indicates that customers are responding to email surveys still predominantly on desktops rather than on mobile devices. Voice is less than half the length of email. When we consider all that together and multiply it out and look at the amount of verbatim data that we receive, so considering both the participation rate and the amount of words, we can see that voice still produces almost twice the amount of verbatim data than the email channel. So a pretty significant difference there. So summing up, our recommendation would be that where you have customer contacting you by voice, you should implement voice-based surveys. This is particularly interesting when we look at some of the research that was carried out last year across Australian organisations, financial services, that found that the survey approach is being used. Whilst voice has significant penetration at 32%, email surveys are still more than twice as likely. Given that the volume of voice interactions overall dwarfs the number of email interactions, we think that this is a pretty large opportunity for Australian business to gather more and better quality data. So whilst most of what I've shared with you today has been about operational best practice and the data behind it, I think it's important briefly to consider what VoC might look like in the future and how today's operational practices can align with VoC programs of the future. Our vision of the future starts with the customer and the ability to provide contextualized and metadata-rich feedback at every interaction point and at each stage of the customer journey. Leveraging machine learning to identify the potential value of feedback and to deliver it to the frontline team members that have specific context knowledge. This drives genuine actionable insights, which can once again leverage machine learning to deliver them to the people within the rest of the organisation or even in partner organisations that can make the best use of them. Whether that's people managers, analysts, platform owners, product manufacturers, having direct access to contextualised actionable insights is what can really turbocharge continual improvement. Closing the feedback loop is critically important too, both for customers and employees. It's empowering and it drives engagement and delivers a self-fulfilling outcome of creating more feedback and consequently continual improvement. When executed effectively, the outcomes of a future program such as this will be to create a single organisation from both the customer's perspective and critically from the employee's perspective as well. Promoting a culture that is continually responsive and creating an organisation that stays relevant to customers in the market. Empowering employees by giving clear meaning to how their actions help customers and giving employees a sense of control over their jobs and driving staff engagement and retention. With metrics and reporting use cases, while metrics and reporting use cases are important, we recognise that it's leaders and employees that actually drive genuine change. The future of VoC is all about employee engagement and the way that having everybody in the organisation be close to the customer creates resilient and profitable businesses. That's our vision of the future. So to sum it all up, number one, your choice of survey channel is critical in determining both the quality and the quantity of the feedback data you will collect. If your interactions with your customers are on voice, then keeping them on that channel will provide the highest quality and quantity of customer feedback. And number three, VoC programs are evolving and maturing. The successful programs are focused on engagement both at the front line and throughout the business. They'll use tools like technology tools like machine learning to do this at scale. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. And back to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Max, for all those insights. That was really great. And I know that the audience will have lots of questions. In fact, we've already got a couple in the chat room, but we'll reserve them for the Q&A portion of the session. For now, we're going to hear from Jason Katsambiris, who was the NPS lead at MLC Life Insurance until a few days ago. He did record an interview about MLC's customer feedback management journey, which we're going to play for you now.
Can we see that okay?
Yes.
Business, and generally, what is the role that customer feedback plays within the broader business?
Yeah, so my job title is Voice of Customer Program Lead, and I guess the answer is kind of in the name. It's Voice of Customer. It's really bringing customers into the organisation and into the conversation. You know, in any organisation, you know, there's going to be a lot of different data points, and you know, it's easy to focus on things like revenue and, you know, EBITDA and sales, etc. And it's also difficult because, you know, in any organization, resources, time and money is always tight. So trying to come up with improvements or solutions that benefit customers and the business can be a difficult thing to do. And so the point of Voice of Customer is to essentially enable a new data set and a new metric set that is focused on bringing customers and partners into that conversation. You know, you can look at you know, lots of different data points and make various assumptions around what the right move strategically is for the organization. But it also makes it a lot easier when you can back that up with real feedback from your business partners and your customers to say, well, this is actually what they want. This is their pain points. This is what they want to see more of or less of. And creating a metric that essentially helps the organization say, well, you know, we obviously have, you know, finite resources, and we want to make sure that when we're directing them into projects, that it is something that's going to benefit customers and partners.
At CentralCX, we generally see that organisations implement Voice of the Customer platforms for four main reasons. The first one being process and product improvement, employee engagement, so using feedback to coach your employees and to engage them, retention, complaints and compliance, in other words, solving individual customers' problems before they run off to social media or regulators or ombudsman, and business reporting. At MLC, which of those use cases do you think that does your Voice of the Customer platform try and address?
All of them in kind of one stream or another. So I think, you know, as you say, I think most businesses enter a Voice of Customer program wanting to, I guess, create that kind of reporting and that metric that you can surface through metrics like NPS or CSAT, to better understand what customers are saying. That generally starts to kind of metastasize and turn into, how do we actually then take all that feedback and use it for product and process or improvement points? And so I think kind of that's a natural progression. But then also what can't be ignored is that what you mentioned around employee coaching or risk. So for example, you know, if you do get feedback that an employee hasn't you know, engaged with a customer that meets the values or expectations of the organization, then no business is just going to say, oh well, that's not the purpose of this program. So usually that starts to become addressed, and so we branch out into like a closed loop feedback program where we can better understand when customers are in a way displaying dissatisfaction or making complaints through this program. Do we have a way to close that out, resolve those issues before point of escalation? I mean, it can also turn into a proxy sales channel, because if you do have a customer who says, you know, I'm not happy for whatever reason, I'm thinking of leaving your brand, it actually gives you a proactive opportunity to try and call that customer and save that customer, as opposed to them just leaving. So it can actually create, you know, a retention opportunity as you go. And then, of course, through programs like QA and contact centers and whatnot, you know, Voice of Customer really marries up well in that. Instead of, you know, a lot of, say, if you've got a call center, a lot of call centers will say, let's survey, you know, a 3-minute call, a 5-minute call, an 8-minute call, and get some insight on how their call center staff are interacting, engaging with customers. Voice of Customer provides the end result. So you can look through your feedback and find feedback where customers have expressed potentially that the person they spoke to didn't meet their expectations. And then that provides more direct coaching opportunities. kind of as opposed to taking shots in the dark when you're doing QA. You can be a lot more strategic around the coaching that's offered through the Voice of Customer program.
Why was it required, and how did that change get implemented?
It was a small program that existed with Centra CX that focused on email specific surveying. And the challenge that we had was the samples and volumes were quite low. In some months only getting a couple of dozen responses, which is still good and valuable, and you can still, get information out of that. But we felt that as we came off the back of that replatforming program, there was a lot more we could do to really understand the customer journey, the advisor and partner journey. And we hadn't really leveraged the Voice of Customer program in I guess the right way. And so the leadership team at MLC, conscious of the fact we could be doing more to understand the needs of our customers and partners, put up an investment to improve this program. And so that's where we did a bit of a refresh on Voice of Customer. And that included rolling out, surveying into different departments and episodes and journeys along customer and advisor experiences with the brand. Also introducing new channels of surveying. So moving not just in email, but, we can go through post-call surveys now and SMS. So trying to survey customers in channels that work for them. So for example, if a customer calls a call center, they've picked up the phone and called. So it kind of makes sense to survey them on the phone call there, potentially, as opposed to sending an email afterwards. So we tried to meet the customer in the channel that they'd preference for. And what we experienced through that was what we were hoping for, which was a really larger material increase in volume of feedback. So as I say, we went from, a few dozen surveys a month to we're getting anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 pieces of feedback a month at the moment, which is quite significant. I think we take around 15,000 direct calls and interactions through our contact team. So we've moved up to about almost 1 in 3 interactions are having some form of surveying at the moment, which has now provided us with a huge war chest of customer feedback and insights that the business can now, chew through and start to really surface where we can make our customer and partner experiences even better and more valuable.
In terms of maturity around VoC,
yeah.
How have you seen that journey at MLC, and how do you think it'll progress into the future?
It's been exponential the past 12 months because, the program, like I said, we had a really basic kind of program that we've invested time, effort and resources into. And we're starting to get a lot of data, feedback and insights that are already starting to shape, business decisions. And, people around the organization are starting to talk about it more. Stakeholders that previously hadn't had much to do with the program are now reaching out saying, hey, how can we get involved? How can we, merge this data into other streams and work within the organization? Especially a lot of transformational and project teams are really keen to say, how can we use the Voice of Customer data as a backstop for our programs? How do we prove out that the projects we're doing exist to hit a mark for a customer suite? And then how can we measure success through it? And again, I think it's really, like I said before, it's build it and they will come. I think it can be hard for people who haven't had much to do with Voice of Customer, or haven't had the experience to understand the value in it. But once you start and open those floodgates and people start to see the kinds of feedback and how it can be used to shape a better overall experience, then there's not like I said before, there's not a department or a lead or manager anywhere who wouldn't want to be part of that.
Thank you very much, Jason. Really appreciate the time that you've put in and your insights into the way that Voice of the Customer has worked at MLC.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to both Jason and Max, for that interview. We're going to switch things up a little bit now with a short panel discussion. I'm saying short because I know there's lots of questions coming through. And I'm going to hand over to our moderator, Richard Fink. Richard is the CEO at GSN, one of our sponsors today, and he will introduce the panel. Over to you, Richard.
Terrific. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Max, and obviously thanks to Jason. I don't know about you guys, but it was very interesting to hear the improvements from 40 to 50 surveys a month to 4,000 to 5,000 is just an incredible journey over a period of time. To share some more perspectives on successful customer feedback programs, I'd like to welcome Hamish Kay. Hamish is the Performance and Insight Analyst at AMP in New Zealand, and Adam Elzanati, Business Development Manager at MCCA, both very unique businesses in their own right, but both with fairly successful customer feedback programs. Welcome, guys. I might start, Hamish, with yourself, and if you could just describe a little bit the role of the customer feedback program within AMP New Zealand.
Yeah, so a bit like Jason, we're currently at a stage where we're trying to revive the Voice of Customer program. When we initially engaged with Centra CX way back in 2015, which seems like an eternity ago, we wrapped our Voice of Customer program with Lean Six Sigma methodology. And so we got frontline staff, managers, pretty much everyone exposed to the Lean Six Sigma methodology so that they could focus on the continuous improvement for those better outcomes for customers. So in addition to getting the verbatims, it helped support with qualitative, and then we also had the quantitative numbers in order to meld them together to provide those little silos to provide the leadership team evidence that these are things that customers are actually really interested about. And on top of that, we developed a customer room. So the customer room was a meeting place, and this is pre-COVID, obviously. So every morning it was a 20-minute stand-up, and we would have people from finance, legal, marketing, product, customer services, and we would all meet, and there would be customer topics for the day, and we'd work through them. And if there were any roadblocks, then we would send them on to the appropriate team in order to remediate, and then come back the next day with an outcome for that customer. Hopefully the intent was to have a less than 24-hour turnaround for anything that was raised. So we incorporated, in addition to the verbatim feedback through NPS, also customer complaints. So that was really successful. It managed to hold out right up until pre-COVID, and then there was a change in the leadership team. So when the focus was moved away, it was predominantly used just as a KPI measure for our CEO. So that's where it is currently at the moment, and we're just trying to rejuvenate it so that it has a better focus for customer outcomes.
Terrific. Thanks, Hamish. Adam, you're a slightly different business to the mainstream. How do you use the Voice of the Customer or customer feedback program at MCCA?
So we implement it through pretty much just the standard post-call survey, breaking up into 3 questions, mainly around NPS, post-call resolution, and the agent quality. So we haven't implemented other Voice of the Customer, I guess, programs through email and SMS like Max showed in the presentation. We've mainly opted for the post-call option. I think it is pretty successful, if I can say. We are extremely happy. It's something that we're very proud that we implemented. I would say that it's given us a lot of insight into where we sit within our community, because we are, like you said, quite niche, and we are a community-owned organisation. So to understand sort of where we sit within our community, and it gives us a lot of insights into what our customers' pain points were and what they are now, and how we need to improve as a business. So I think, yeah, it is quite successful, and that's sort of how we've implemented it.
So, Adam, you talk about the success of the program. In your views or your perspectives, what are the main things that drive that success for you?
I mean, if I can give like a specific example, so MCCA we manage, this sort of takes us back to, I guess, how we've managed the situation around COVID and lockdowns, and how MPS gave us a lot of, or how Voice of the Customer gave us a lot of information in regards to that. and how we need to improve it. So we manage in a liquid investment fund. And this investment fund sort of allows investors to put money in a fund, but then give us 30 days notice when they want to withdraw or take funds out of that account. During the strict lockdown, obviously, we'll also close our doors. And I think it was a bit hard for clients to sort of, that were experiencing cash flow problems, to wait those 30 days. So it's through voice of the customer and the program that we rolled out, that we sort of understood where we stand with our clients and where those strict conditions sort of sat with them when they were in financial hardship. So we actually made an executive decision to reach out to all of our investors and say, look, we can offer you $5,000 as an immediate withdrawal, which will be processed within 48 hours. I guess that measure that we took didn't just change the way we did business, but also boosted our clients' trust in the fund, and it helped bolster our reputation. That would be impossible without something like voice of the customer, because we simply would not have acted in such a responsive way, I think.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. Now, Hamish, to put you on the spot a little bit, I think your customer feedback program comes in two halves, if you like: pre-COVID, where it was quite successful, and post-COVID with leadership changes. Maybe you can share some perspectives of pre-COVID, why it was successful and what was working well. And then maybe, you know, since that and since the leadership changes, what do you think are the main things that, let's say, absent from the business now that's caused a drop in the program and therefore a need to remodelise it?
I think, thankfully, it's easily to identify one of the great outcomes of pre-COVID. We actually had an app, and it was run out of AMP Australia because we were connected with the group at that stage. And so through the Voice of the Customer program, we got a lot of feedback about customers saying that they weren't actually able to see their specific funds within the app. And so that led into the customer room. The customer room got engaged. It went through to product, marketing, digital, and legal in order to do their little bit pieces in order to remediate that issue for customers. And then in 2 weeks, which is a surprisingly fast turnaround at AMP, they were able to actually get an outcome where customers were actually able to see things that were more tailored to their situation, which they didn't have previously. So yeah, that 2-week turnaround was fantastic, and it was supported by the fact that we had the qualitative and quantitative data in order to push it through. And that was one of the main things that the leadership team pre-COVID were really adamant about, and also obviously ensuring that we adhered to the Lean Six Sigma methodology of quantifying that issue and the effort that was required for it. Post-COVID, the biggest thing, I guess, it's just we had a ton of change. So we actually, we've uncoupled, you know, a Hollywood star put it best, we've consciously decoupled from the group. And so all of our systems now are basically back on shore. So previously we were uploading everything back into the mothership, which was AMP Group, but now we're mostly completely independent. AMP also sold its life business. So we had you know, trillions of changes actually going through the woodwork. And that was obviously the reason that the focus was taken away from the Voice of the Customer program. One of the wonderful things is I was given the opportunity when they disestablished the NPS manager role to become a pseudo NPS lead in name only, no extra money. But with that opportunity, what I've done is kind of covertly been sending out emails to the main stakeholders that have also come on, as we've also had changes within each of the teams. So we've had pretty much 100% turnover in the marketing and product teams. So obviously they're the ones that are most interested in the verbatim feedbacks. So with that, and they also actually disestablished the VoC team. So there was a VoC team as well that was coupled with that. And so me being the VoC team, pretty much a one-man band, sending out those emails, we have actually had a lot of change. So one of the things that the leadership team decided to do, which was interesting, and I'm sure other businesses do it as well, is they created an NPS score that excluded 30% of the verbatims that we were getting. So I highlighted that at the end of last year, and we've got agreement, thankfully, now to add in the episode NPS back into the domestic score. So AMP, again, we report 2 different NPS scores, one to the group which is a completely convoluted NPS calculation, and one domestically to our own New Zealand customers, and also for the internal stakeholders. So yeah, so we've got conflicting NPS measures that is my next mission in order to align them so that we actually do take into account customer feedback, because the domestic score at the moment, it includes interaction NPS, which is all the phone based, so inbound and outbound. It includes all the episode NPS for our main investment products. It includes news and also newsletter responses, but the group score is only IE NPS and ENPS.
So Hamish, to put you on the spot, and there's probably a no-brainer answer to this one, but we heard from Jason at MLC about the difference between a program that was supported not just bottom up, but also top down at the executive leadership level. And then we obviously heard from Adam in terms of how well the executive leadership at MCCA embraced the program and jumped on customer feedback to create some fairly significant change. In your perspective, how important is bridging that gap between the customer feedback, the front line, and then obviously the executive leadership participation, or even active participation, not passive participation?
I think it's probably 1,000,000,000%. Pretty much it's the most important thing in order to make sure that the VoC program actually achieves the right outcomes for the business and also for the customers that are engaging with us. So yeah, it's really visible comparing the pre-COVID, because I've had the opportunity to be at AMP now for 13 years, so I've seen the great times and the less happy times. So in that transition, seeing all the different leadership that we've had as well. There's a lot of language change, but the things that are constant are the customers don't change. The issues that they face are not different. And so that's the most important thing, I think, is to make sure that you're still the squeaky wheel. So even though I'm only a NPS lead in subscript, it's making sure that you're the squeaky wheel in order to be the customer advocate within the business, in order to make sure that there are less complaints and less friction for customers to actually interact with your products and services that are provided.
Terrific. Adam and Hamish, thank you. I know there's lots of great questions, so I'm going to kind of end the panel, and Adam and Hamish, as well as Max, are around to answer any questions. I'm also around to answer any questions. I mean, much like Hamish, I had the privilege of working in David Thodey's extended leadership team when he was the CEO at Telstra, and rolling out a fairly significant voice of the customer program. And I think, as Hamish touched on, when you have a strong leader like that driving the change and driving the change program, it works very well. So I'm happy to support the team with any questions as well. But Sharon, over to you for questions.
Yeah, well, that was a great panel. Thank you so much. So now it's your turn, audience. You can either ask a question in the chat room, and we've got a few already, or you can unmute and ask the question and engage directly. And also anyone in the audience is welcome to jump in and offer their experiences, their insights. So we turn it into a bit of a discussion as well. And just a reminder, there is a champagne prize for the most interesting question. So don't be shy. So I'm going to kick off with some of the questions in the chat. Rahul at Honey Insurance has asked, has any work been done to map the difference in positive or negative sentiment versus the number of words? That is, does more words generally mean a lower score? Does anyone have any comment on that, Max?
Sure, I can answer that to a degree. So no direct correlation work's been done. And of course, just to bear in mind, correlation doesn't mean causation. So you do have to be very careful with the conclusions that you jump to on this. But what does come out of the data is that email is a more negative channel, if you like, than other channels. And email has a larger amount of words in the verbatim. So it would likely hold that's transitive, and that goes across. So that longer words generally do mean a greater level of dissatisfaction, but I don't think it's been looked at in specific detail. One thing we have noticed on that point, though, is that, and this is a little bit anecdotal, because email is more negative, they also give you verbatims that are more specific about what has gone wrong. So less about the customer experience side of it and more about the process, if I can put it that way. So this process broke down at this point. Anecdotally, that tends to be more the case with email. With voice, it tends to be more, it's a little less insightful in the sense of explaining the process. It's more about how the person feels. Maybe that's because it's more immediate. You know, there's still more emotion in it because it's just straight after the interaction. They haven't had time to kind of process it and look at it more rationally. So that's a little bit of anecdotal twist on that.
Thank you, Max. Greg, I noticed you unmuted. Did you want to ask a question? No, you might have stepped away. Okay, they're coming through thick and fast. So Steve Mitchinson has asked, how do you ensure enterprises don't sanitize the results by being selective about what feedback gets captured? And he's seen some very bad examples. I don't know if
I'll have a crack at this, Sharon.
Okay, sure.
So I'll have a crack at it because I've worked for an organisation like Telstra where it was led by the CEO, Dan, and you wouldn't dare mess with the results. I've also worked for an organisation probably on the other extreme and probably more extreme than Hamish, where the organisation did happy calls, and essentially only the happy calls were actually pitched up to the executive team, and everything was good. I think from my perspective, you got a couple, and this is the layers thing. So I think strong leadership will stop that if it's seen to be sponsored at the executive level, and therefore it is really about improvement and not the score, but the improvement. And I think if you don't have that, as Hamish said, unfortunately it's courage. So it actually takes someone with the courage to point out the true data that actually sits underneath and continue to bubble up that conversation until people start actually hearing it and responding it. Now, I was in a fortunate position with the Happy Call company. I was actually able to bring in a proper VoC program on the back of that. But again, I think much like Hamish said, it needs people like Hamish and people like everyone on this call to have the courage to be championing the change. And you know, quite often it's not a position that is well responded to for at least a period of time. So that's why I call it courage, because it can go one of two ways, right? It can actually be great for your career and your company and your longevity, or, you know, it can marginalise you. So I do think it comes down to either strong leadership or really strong courage.
Fantastic.
I don't know if anyone else has got some other perspectives, but yes, you're right, Stephen. There is a tendency for some companies to fudge results, which doesn't actually give you any benefits of the program.
Yeah, I think that the other part of that was, unfortunately, too many CEOs and senior executive teams aren't close enough to know what gets captured. So an insurance company that I did some work for, they never took feedback from customers whose claims were rejected, and a bank who never took feedback from customers whose loans were declined, but their NPS was pretty flash.
Yeah. I think some of the courage, Stephen, you know, I recall thinking that when I joined this company and looking at the results, just thinking, knowing the operational performance, the results didn't collaborate. You know, you can actually, you know yourself that the results aren't where your operations sit, and then you got to go digging and investigating, and you're spot on.
I would just add to that I think a critical part about success of these programs is about making the information go far and wide. And if you keep it within analysts, and analysts sanitize either the results or the interpretation of the results, that's where you get these situations where what's presented back to the business isn't a semblance of reality. In organisations where you get feedback going back to your front line and you do that automatically without a human layer sitting in the middle, that tends to get the bad news out pretty quickly. And the bad news tends to motivate people to fix it. You know, good news motivates inaction in some sense, and bad news motivates action. And I think, yeah, getting it out there broadly can certainly help.
And there's been some strong correlation, Steve, between customer NPS and employee NPS as well. And the correlation over a relatively short period of time actually suggests that they align. So if you're asking your customers for feedback and asking your frontline team for feedback, you'll find that the responses actually align quite significantly. What stops people fudging the employee feedback is probably another dimension to that, but you're kind of channeling it through a specific operational area and then comparing the two results. But yeah.
I think just to add to that, one of the wonderful things that we did do when the program was working wonderfully is that we actually had the CEO and all of the leadership come down to the contact center, and we weren't able to cherry pick the call. So basically they were sat with an agent for 4 calls in a row. And so that really helped obviously shape, because it started to make sense. The bitching and moaning that was coming through the verbatims that were hidden actually had to be surfaced, because they go, hey, I heard this. Why wasn't I told about it? And we'll go, well, it's because the middle management chose to sweep that under the rug. So here's the real results. So yeah, that's one other thing I think to all the points that were made, is that's how you actually service it, is just unintentionally bringing the CEO down to the coalface and then actually presenting the truth.
Fantastic. I might move on to the next question. Brendan from Zurich Financial Services has asked, are you finding any evidence of customer survey fatigue? Considering far more companies have VoC programs, it's hard to interact with any business these days without a survey surfacing.
I'm happy to start with that one, or
go for it.
Okay, so yes, there is such a thing as survey fatigue. Is it significant? No, not particularly. The reason, and we've done some research in this space, the main set of data that I've presented today that I'd point to that is, if you look at the 53% participation rate for voice surveys, that inevitably involves a significant segment that are calling multiple times. When you look across call centres, most issues, FCR, first call resolution, is typically still fairly low. So you do end up with quite a few of those. I guess that's probably that's the net outcome, that people are completing surveys, which means that they're not tired of doing surveys. The question of whether you should offer them or not, or whether an organisation should take action to prevent survey fatigue, is an interesting one. And we do that with some clients, where we suppress surveys based on whether they've had the offer or had the response. My general view is that customer expectations have changed over the last 10 years. Everyone now expects a survey, and if you don't give them a survey, something is actually missing. So they will choose to ignore the survey if they want. They don't feel an obligation that they should fill it out. But if you don't give it to them and they're unhappy, well, what have you done? What's the message that you've sent? So yeah, that's kind of my view of that situation. Maybe Adam or Hamish, you might have a different view.
I agree with it. I think the only addition that I'd have to it is that you need to make sure that with your episode NPS that you select the customer at the right part of the journey. So we had a few things that were out of sync, and we were surveying the customer 5 times from cradle to the grave. So you just have to make sure that you obviously have the exceptions to exclude it, and a process to identify when there's trouble as well.
We had the same as Hamish, same as AFP. So we found that we'll surveying so many times, and there was that fatigue. But once we sort of fine-tuned it and we were a bit more hands-on, we saw that sort of phase out.
Fantastic. I want to come to a question in the chat room, which is probably something that everybody is struggling with at some point, around which channels do you survey people through, and Max touched on quite a lot of data in his presentation. Heather from Petshaw has asked, assuming you have different channels to deliver service for customers, how do you reconcile this when there is likely very different contact types for each channel? For example, simple transactions in the portal versus more complex via voice and phone. And maybe this one has your name on it, Max.
Yeah, sure. So the data I've presented is very broad, and it does not attempt to address those that situation at all in terms of the different contact types. Having said that, and I can speak anecdotally for that, it probably comes down to value. So if you're surveying on something that is very transactional and somebody would do frequently without deriving a lot of value from that transaction, then the nature of your survey needs to be very, very unintrusive, very simple, very easy, and really just focused on getting the pieces that are important. And you would expect a fairly small participation rate on that. So the example I can think of is around transactional banking, where we saw voice participation in the mid-20s. We take that up to something really high value, something worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, like maybe life insurance or wealth management are good examples. And you will see on the voice channel, again, participation rates that exceed 70%. So it definitely has an impact. And I would say that the biggest driver to that is channel's important, but the biggest driver is value. Right. That would be my kind of comment on that.
Okay. We have a question from Adam at RemServe. The tangible/actionable insights shared by Adam and Hamish are absolute gold. How did you go about framing up the right questions and prompts to bring these insights to the surface? So I'll hand that one to Adam and Hamish.
Thankfully, we didn't actually have to do anything. So our customers are so passionate about those process failures and the interaction failures that they had, that they were just more than willing to actually provide the information. But back to Max's point in the presentation, the questions that we do have at the ENPS level are very, very short. So there's only 3 questions, and basically the customers dumped basically their life into, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us? And they just went for gold, thankfully. So I guess I have to actually appreciate that our customers are engaged enough with the company to actually tell us what went wrong for them. Yeah, it's simplicity, I think, is the most important thing, and just actually don't corner the customer into an unintended outcome for them. So yeah, a little bit like what Richard was saying about, don't just produce the happy calls. You've got to provide the entire spectrum of color.
Thanks, Hamish. Adam, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think for us it's a bit more complicated, purely because our clients, a lot of them are from an ESL background. So it was trying to help them understand the importance of leaving us feedback and verbatims and participating in the voice of the customer or post-call surveys that we rolled out. Similarly to Hamish, though, it was all about simplicity. So I remember when we first rolled this out with Max, we did come across a few speed humps, and we sort of had to adjust our questions and the way we asked the questions in the survey, and even changing some of the, I guess the numbers or the entries that the client can actually input to answer the specific questions. But we did pretty much base it off 3 simple questions, like we said earlier: first call resolution, agent quality, and NPS. So it was a bit different to when I helped roll this out at NAB, where we didn't have this issue. With NAB, it was very similar to what Hamish is saying with AMP. So it was, clients were very happy to leave feedback, and we were going through a bit of a period of transition and unease to rolling it out at such an organisation like MCCA, where it was more community orientated. And unfortunately, we did have to educate the community around the importance of this and the value it has to the business, and then in turn, the value that would have back to the customer, because they would, directly see those changes like we discussed earlier. Hopefully that answered the question, Adam.
Yeah, that's great, Adam. Thank you. You just got a love heart from the other Adam. Alison from Prosper is asking, is anyone running sentiment over voice to text and then comparing that to the customer survey response and sentiment? And I invite anyone to unmute and provide some insight there in their organization.
So at AMP, and again, it's an unintended consequence of me also being product lead for AWS Connect. So we have AWS Contact Lens being run over the verbatims that get converted through the calls. The transcription is a little bit horrible. No offense to everyone in Australia, but it's based on Australian English and it doesn't match up with Kiwi English. So it's pretty bad. It can't even translate at the moment AMP, but I do see that they've added functionality now that you can upload dictionaries in order to fix those issues. So yeah, just in the process of fixing that. We also used AWS Comprehend in order to jumble together our complaints, our the NPS verbatims, and also our chats all together in one massive silo in order to just determine what the common themes and the sentiments were. So we're still actually just trying to process that, because last year we had around about 13,000 responses through all of our surveys, and we had about 6,000 to 7,000 chats. So yeah, there's a lot of data, and we had about 1,000 complaints. So yeah, so there's a lot of gold to be mined out of it. It's just making sure that we've got the right attitude in order to determine what the outcomes are out of that.
Thank you.
I might add one comment there briefly. Sentiment analysis on the actual interaction tracks. I've seen varied results, and I think it becomes use case specific to understand whether it aligns or not from the data that I've seen. But one thing that did become quite evident is that sentiment analysis gave you limited insight into the reason for the customer's dissatisfaction. Asking them directly why they gave a particular score or how you could improve actually gave a different set of results than what came through trying to categorize customer sentiment. So that's in the limited sets of data that I've seen.
Thanks, Max. I'm just going to finish up with a question that I'm not sure anyone has the answer to, but Glenn from QSuper has asked, NPS and even CSAT scores can be horrendous. Insert any Australian big bank name here. And yet the big four continue to dominate lending. What is the metric that cuts through all that? It's even beyond likelihood to recommend. Is there any magic metric beyond NPS and CSAT? I think that one is going to be in the too hard box for anyone.
Maybe it's whether customers, customer acquisition and retention, do they vote with their feet and leave?
Yeah, I think there is one metric, and that's apathy. So if you see apathy in your results, you're in big trouble, right? It's far worse than negative. So if you have a lot of negative results, that's something to work with. Those people have become detractors for a reason, and they still care enough to tell you. You can contact them, you can turn them around, you can fix the problems that they have. You don't need to worry that much about your promoters. Yes, you do have to pay attention, but the ones in the middle, if you see that percentage growing, and they're the apathetic ones, the minute they've either given up on your brand altogether and they're just waiting for the opportunity to leave, or they're so price conscious or service conscious that the minute that something better comes along, they're going to leave you in a piece. So while there may not be a question specifically that will cut through everything, I think if you looked at and you've brought up the big four banks here, I think if you looked at the level of, let's call them neutral to the middle apathetic lot, I think you'd find that it's very, very, very large. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Well, I'm now going to ask you actually, Max, to announce the winner of the bottle of champagne prize for the best audience question. Who does that go to?
Well, I think that last question was actually a perler. Glenn's question there, I think, had everyone stumped for a minute. So congratulations, Glenn. And look, thank you for all the great questions. I just wanted to say that if I'm very passionate about this topic, if anybody wants to talk about these stats and these numbers or talk about their VoC programs, please reach out through Sharon, and absolutely happy to share and to contribute to the overall industry learning. So thank you, Sharon.
Oh, no, thank you. And Glenn, I'll be in touch to arrange delivery of that bottle of bubbles. And there were a couple of questions we didn't get around to answering. So the team at Centra CX and GSN will be in touch to discuss your questions. But that brings our event to a close. I hope you enjoyed it. To everyone who attended, to all our wonderful speakers and sponsors, thank you so much. We'll be sending around a short survey to get your thoughts. And please keep your eyes peeled for future GSN events in their series, including Move to the Cloud, better understand the benefits and business case behind the move to the cloud, and chatbots, learn about the latest AI and chatbot technology use cases for the financial services industry. The Centra CX and the GSN team remain available to engage further with you, and I'll share their contact details on the survey. Wishing everyone a wonderful day ahead. Stay safe, stay well, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. Thank you, everyone.